Welcome to a very surprise session, which I knew about 30 seconds ago. How long have I got to speak, by the way, from now?
45 minutes plus 15 minutes.
All right, I'll come in under that comfortably. So usually I give it with this guy. He's my boss, but he's not here today, so I'm not. The background to this is that I work for a software vendor, and it's having growing pains as a software company. One of those pains is that we don't have a good API. Well, we've got a good API, but it's not documented or told to anybody. And another thing is that our automation behind the scenes is a bit crap. So one of the things that I've been involved with since I joined the company was trying to change that situation so that we've got proper APIs and to develop a PowerShell module that is good enough for use by large enterprise customers of our software company. So it's got to be good, right? If you've got to roll it out to 100,000 people. And this is just a walkthrough of some of the past mistakes and some of the tools that we've been using to help us on that journey. Now, this session is aimed probably at a level below what I would say is in the room. So if some of it is a bit basic, you'll have to forgive me. I didn't have time in the 30 seconds before I stood here to change anything. But hopefully not. So when you're writing a PowerShell module, you've got to consider who the audience is. People in development call this personas, right? Now, the audience for this is pretty varied because, actually, let's talk about this. How good is your PowerShell? I presume, seeing as this is PowerShell Day, at least everybody's got a basic knowledge, right? But I ask this question a lot in interviews. And the answer I get most often is I can copy and paste with the best of them. That will instantly lose you the job in my eyes, saying that phrase, and it's the phrase that I hear the absolute most. But when you're designing an enterprise class PowerShell module, these are also the people who are going to be using your toolset. So it's got to be simple enough for people who just want a one-liner, they just want to run something from the command line. Yeah, it's got to be ready for those people. Next set of people is your proper experts. Obviously, I don't really mean him, but he's just up there to represent an expert. Somebody who writes their own tools, which I presume is most of the guys in the audience here. Somebody who will incorporate the stuff that you give them into other automation, other plans, et cetera, et cetera. And the third lot is machines, right? You've got to have proper output. You've got to take proper input so that it conforms to standards and machines can understand what you're doing. There's a rather famous example, certainly in my area of the industry. There's a virtualization product made by Citrix called XenServer. They've got a PowerShell module. It is the worst pile of shit I've ever seen in my entire life. It is auto-generated from their API and spits out, every single command spits out a single string, no matter what. Doesn't matter how many lines of anything, it's just a single string. So you've got to do effectively what everybody does in Linux, which is turning text into objects before you can even do anything with it. It is terrible. So machines are a good thing as well to design for. API coverage. Anything you can do in the GUI, you should be able to do on the command line. So what we were looking for is making sure that you don't, for these large enterprise customers, they don't have to drop out of automation to do anything manual. Yeah, so we need full coverage of the API. VMware, they've got a product called Horizon View, which is their VDI product. They didn't have that, right? They didn't have full API coverage in their PowerShell. You had to drop down to the GUI. Loads of people moaned about this, unsurprisingly. So they produced a new PowerShell module. That's 2 commands, connect and disconnect. This dumps their entire API into a single object. That's a good trick. So you dump it into the object, then you change stuff inside the object, and then that's it. It has full API coverage. It's not particularly useful. You couldn't, if you really want, you can do everything in it, right? But it's not particularly useful. Version control, I presume everybody here is very familiar with version control. Some of the people who this is designed for are not. So I don't care what version control you use, whether you use GitLab, GitHub, VSTS, doesn't matter. Just use it and get familiar with it as well. I don't just use it for code. I use it for pretty much everything, for documents and configuration files and all stuff I end up putting in Git. Sometimes even PowerShell presentations. If you're designing PowerShell functions, it should do one simple thing, a single task. Yeah? It shouldn't be like deploy infrastructure. Or in the case of VMware, it should not be grab my entire API. Yeah? One simple task. That way it's easily used by the 3 personas, right? The people who need a one-liner, people who need to put it into bigger and more interesting tools, and also machines. So, paired functions. For every get, there should be a set. For every add, there should be a remove. I see a lot of things where there is an add, but not a remove, and there is a get, but not a set, right? So when I'm testing the stuff that I write, I'll quite often do a single function get, and then as part of my integration testing, I will then pipe it to a set function. And then I will compare the results, because a get into a set should give you the exact same results as you started with, right? And you can also do the stuff with remove and add and all that sort of stuff. And if you can pipe one to another, then you know you're doing well. Like I say, not the people who this is designed for is perhaps not at the PowerShell level that you guys are. So this is stuff you do need to point out to them, which is using approved verbs. Yep. Now, very good for your experts because they see a get, yeah? They see an enable. They know what that means in terms of what that function is supposed to do. I have, as yet, not run into a single situation where one of the 100 and odd different approved verbs isn't suitable for a function that I'm writing. You do not need to go and grab verbs that are not available. You can even do get verb on the command line to show you what those approved verbs are. And if you look on Microsoft's website, it will give you a lot more detail than that. So use approved verbs. Now, I presume everybody here is familiar with the PowerShell ISE. Don't use it. It's crap. Instead, use VS Code. VS Code has now changed their user installation from program files to the profile. Not sure I approve of that. If you're in an enterprise situation, you don't want an extra 3 gig per developer sitting in a profile that you've got to pay for now on storage. In the release notes, the July release notes where they changed the installation of VS Code to profile, they actually stated in the release notes it's so you can install VS Code in a lockdown environment. Well, if you're in an enterprise and you've locked down your environment, you've probably done it on purpose. And you don't particularly want vendors producing software that is designed to deliberately get you around that. I mean, there's all kinds of, I don't know how many extensions there are to VS Code, but I know there's pen testing extensions and pen testing tools that you can add into it. I'm not sure I approve of the ability to install VS Code to a profile. Although they have had a portable version for a while, so you can use it. You've always been able to use it if you grab the portable version. I presume everybody uses VS Code and not uses the IST. Is there any other tools that people use that they think is better than this? Don't say Notepad++ to me. No? Good. I'm happy that I'm picking the right tool. That's great. So discovery, Ranoff finds greatest living explorer. Do this session abroad, they have no idea who he is because they're Americans and they don't know anything outside the borders of their country. But particularly, let's talk about compatibility. The best thing that I found, and this is kind of like industry standard now, especially if you're a vendor producing PowerShell modules, is to prefix with a 3-letter acronym between the verb and the noun. Yeah. Because what you really want to do, what you really want to avoid, is calling your function the same name as somebody else's, because then you can't tell which function you're going to be calling when you call that function. Get version, that's a good one. Every single software product in the world has got a version, and if you write a function called get version, you're going to have compatibility issues with all kinds of other stuff. So, company I work for is called FSLogix, so FSL. And that means that even just looking at the function, you know where it's come from. Yeah. So not only do you know what it does, but you also know where it comes from. So even if you're just doing it internally, you could, and writing modules internally for a company, you could adopt this to say what business group or whatever whoever you're targeting at for your modules. Public functions should take pipeline input. Seems obvious. The amount of times I've seen software companies produce a PowerShell module that's meant for large enterprise to deal with, and you try and pipe something into it, pipeline doesn't work. It is absolutely essential that you configure all of your inputs correctly. As part of my testing for any function, I will always test positional input, although I hate positional input, pipeline input, by name, and by value, right? So many people say, well, the function does what I think it should. Technically, it does the job that it's supposed to. But unless you get your inputs right, you'll find yourself frustrating all of your users of your code, and they will hate you and be cursing your name because it doesn't take pipeline input. If you're writing your own module and you want to create your own objects and then pipe them into another function, Microsoft's standard is to use input object as a parameter, and you can actually take advantage of that without writing your own class or everything by doing PS type name equals in your output object. So then, instead of having to make sure your output object complies with all your mandatory parameters or parameter set names, create a new parameter set, which is just for the input object. Give your output object from the get a type name, and then when you pipe it to the set, you can then do value from pipeline equals true, and then with the PS type name in there. Very useful in terms of piping to and from your own stuff in a module without having to write your own classes. Help. Who writes help for all of their PowerShell functions? Nice. I should. But when you're writing something that is for public dissemination, particularly outside your own organization, help is crucial. Who writes comment-based help? Yeah. Who does any other kind of help? All right. We'll get onto that. I'm not going to have any comment-based help in my PowerShell module that's going to be consumed by external customers. The reason being is if I want to update the documentation, then using comment-based help, then I have to do a code drop. I have to rev the version of the module. I don't want to have to force people to upgrade their PowerShell module when I want to update the documentation. So help should be a first-class citizen, right? Now, I also want update help to work. So now you're talking external help in a cab file that you can download from the internet when somebody runs update help. And I also want the -online to work. So there should be a web-based target for when somebody goes -online, and it will take you to the most up-to-date documentation. Help should absolutely be a first-class citizen when you're talking about externally produced, or modules produced for external consumption. Talking about external consumption, who has worked with companies where there's over 10,000 users? Yeah, a few of us, right? What happens on your machine when you've got 2 users in a lab AD, yeah, compared to when you've got 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 users in AD, right? Very important that you bear in mind that scale will affect the timings of your code immensely. If it only takes 10 seconds, I ran into this yesterday, actually. I had a job to do. It was actually mounting a VHD, editing the contents, and dismounting a VHD. Easy peasy. Takes 5 seconds to mount, 5 seconds to dismount, no problem. They had 10,000. So now you've got 10,000 times 10 seconds, and this ended up being something like a 14-hour run on the script, which was way outside their maintenance windows. So make sure that when you're dealing at scale, you're being efficient with your code. And we'll talk about how you can do that in a bit. Aliases, shortening parameter names, using positional parameters. Try not to do it in shared code. I don't care what you do on the command line, but in shared code, I would like to be able to read it. I asked a question on Stack Overflow a little while ago, and I got this back. No other text. Right. That is a lot of punctuation with no explanation. And it took me quite a while to work out what it was doing. Yeah, I can see Ryan going, what the hell is that? I can look it up for you.
I don't want to know who it was.
I whinged at the time, saying, that's not a great answer, thanks very much. Annoyingly, they were entirely correct, and this does work. But I had to first understand it and then rewrite it in a version that was readable by somebody else, and including me, 3 months down the line when I come back and look at it and go, what the fuck was that I've got in my module? There is no place for code golf in the enterprise. you know what code golf is? I presume. So code golf is like a scripting challenge. It's how much functionality can I get into a single line of code? So basically, how much can I compress a complex job into the shortest possible number of characters?
The argument would be that this is how JavaScript works.
Well,
Let's not do it. Prove it doesn't work, let's not do it.
Yes, absolutely. You still see code golf competitions on the internet, and they are entertaining to do. They are not entertaining to read or to work with. So make sure that you are not doing code golf. Yeah, they're really tricky to debug. They obfuscate everything. Don't do it. Use other people's code at your own risk. You remember that first question, the interview question? I can copy and paste to the best of them. Yeah. How many times have you read somebody's script and you're like, hang on a minute, this code style or the way they've named the variables totally different, and you can tell it's a copy and paste job from somewhere on the internet, right? They haven't then really probably understood it or even changed it to the proper conventions of the organization they're working for. Be very, very careful copying and pasting code, particularly if you don't understand it. So from Kevin Goodman, so he's usually standing here, he's my boss. He sent me this, which is effectively doing get AD user 3 times to get a single group, contents of a single group, and grabbing a whole lot of data and then filtering it, and then doing it 3 times. This one, surprisingly, was taking a very long time with very large AD infrastructure. So he said, can you have a look at this? Because he copied and pasted this from the internet, didn't really understand what was going on. Like, can you simplify this? Now, here's a bit of helpful career advice for everybody in the room. So the first thing you do, when your boss sends you code, you go, wow, wow. All right? And then immediately after that, just be slightly patronizing. 3 calls to get the same info. Then you emphasize how much cleverer you are than him by saying, I've got a better way. And then you do it very simply. Your boss really appreciates that, I can guarantee it. That's better when there's a bit of backwards and forwards between me and him on stage, by the way. That's funnier. But yeah, get the data once. Everybody knows filter left, format right. If you can, scale is hard. Get the smallest amount of data, the fewest amount of times, and the people who are using your module will be very happy with you. Let's talk about speed, now we're on that. This is an actual tattoo on a friend of mine's neck. She runs marathons very, very slowly, like in about 7 hours. And to commemorate how slow she is, she has this tattooed on the back of her neck. Don't use aliases, because the parser PowerShell has to go and figure out and then what those are and then translate them to the actual thing. So not only does it make your code harder to read to do aliases, it's actually slower as well. Don't leave a lot of console output around, even if you can't see it. So if you're multi-threading your PowerShell script, that example before of getting mounting a VHD, changing something inside it, and dismounting it, right? The way I coped with that was I multi-threaded the task. If you leave a lot of console output around, even when it's inside a thread that you actually won't see, it will slow your code down seriously. We talked about this earlier, filter left, format right. You get big speed increases by doing that. Pull data once, we just talked about that as well. Methods are quicker than the pipeline. So using .where rather than piping to where object is quicker. Not that much quicker, but it's definitely quicker. I sort of agree with this and sort of don't. It depends on the task you're doing, yeah, and how much efficiencies you have to, and we'll have another example of that as well. But yeah, methods are quicker than piping to another function. For each is quicker than for each object, so if you can use for each, do it. I hate seeing .NET code in PowerShell scripts when there is a PowerShell command to do exactly the same thing. This is shared code, right? This is meant to be PowerShell development, it's not .NET development. If you know .NET, great, I don't care. Use the PowerShell function when you can. The trouble is, sometimes it's really, really a lot faster. So the way I direct people is, if there is a way to do it in .NET and a way to do it in PowerShell, which there pretty much always is, yeah, by default, use the PowerShell way. If you have to drop to .NET, then put a comment in explaining why you're not using the proper PowerShell verb, because otherwise somebody will come along, do a code review and say, we should change that to PowerShell, and then they've missed the reason why you've dropped to .NET, okay? The one I use a lot is GUID, because new GUID isn't supported in PowerShell 3. And most of the time I have to write stuff that is supported for PowerShell 3. And I can't use new GUID, so I use the .NET object to create the GUID. If you're using it for whatever reason, time savings is a valid one, compatibility is another one, right? But make sure you state why you're using it. Use parallelization. Use jobs. Use run spaces. Who's familiar with run spaces? Run spaces are cool. If you're multi-threading a task and you do it as a job, that job will start an entire instance of the .NET framework in the background. So it's very hungry on resources. If you use run spaces, it creates a new thread within the current instance. Yeah, it's much faster. It is far easier on resources. It is more difficult to use. There is a superb function up on the PowerShell gallery called Invoke Parallel by, who is Rambling Cookie Monster?
Warren Favorite.
There you go, by Warren. I use it a lot. I sometimes write my own stuff, but mostly that function will cover it for me. So use parallelization where you've got long-running tasks. And by long-running, I mean basically anything over a second, right? Because you've got to bear in mind that when you're talking seconds, and then you're talking tens or hundreds of thousands of actions on that code, that is now a long-running task. All of this stuff is covered in far greater detail by PowerShell.org video, and if you want to have a look at that. He doesn't really agree with me with the .NET stuff, but that's fine. Code quality. You have good code quality, you have good testing. If you have good automated testing, that means that you can get to the pub and have a beer much earlier. You spend a lot less time debugging. It's more time up front, but it's a lot less time debugging. So I love Pester. Who uses Pester? Almost everybody. Have you heard of it before?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry?
I've looked at it before, yeah.
Pester's great. I use it all the time because if I'm going to make a change then I will run my Pester test and I will know immediately whether I've broken something bad in the logic of my entire module. So you make sure that you change something in the prerequisite which you're pretty sure, private function, which you're pretty sure isn't going to break anything. If you've got good Pester tests, you can get immediate feedback on the result of that. So in terms of the immediacy of it and the time it takes when you're running tests, it's great. Another great thing about Pester is mocking. Mocking is brilliant because you may be developing in an area, and this happens to me a lot because, you know, I'm writing a PowerShell module that is designed to be consumed in different languages, different time zones, and very different size of environments. I can't stand up 10,000 VMs in Azure. Well, I could, but I don't want to. And it would take hours. Did you know that Azure has a per subscription, per region, per hour limit in IaaS of 10,000 API calls? I've run into that limit quite a lot recently. It's very annoying. That was just a total aside. That's not part of this presentation. But what it means is that mocking, you can simulate an environment that you don't have access to. You can also simulate a broken environment. Yeah? So what happens if you can't reach a domain controller? What happens if vCenter is giving you an error? Yeah? You can mock a command, and instead of actually reaching out to where it's supposed to touch, you can intercept that and give it back the response that you want. Now, this is also great for testing its different versions of infrastructure, because you don't want to stand up version 8.1, 8.2 and test all your stuff against it. You can say, this is the API response for this call, this API call into this bit of software. You can save that, and then instead of having that infrastructure available at that version, you can then present what you know is the output to the mock, to your PowerShell script, and now you can test everything properly and easily against multiple versions of targets. However good unit tests are, and well, that's what we're talking about now is unit tests, do integration tests as well. Those windows definitely worked on their own, right? 2 unit tests, no integration tests. All right? So unit tests are meant to give you immediate feedback. Integration tests are less often and deeper testing of your code. And the last one that you should do, or at least we should do in terms of producing something that's meant to be consumed by customers at scale, is stress testing. Now, you don't want to do stress testing every single time you make a code change. You know, it's when you've got a bump in maybe a major version of your module or major version of something that you want to do some stress testing or some scale testing. All right. So we talked about Pester, a tool to help with help, PlatyPS. This will automate everything about help that I was talking about. You write your help in Markdown. Was this what you were talking about before? Yeah. Write your help in Markdown, and then PlatyPS will change it into whatever you like. It will even take the comment-based help out of your function and change it to something nice. Markdown is great because you get a single source of truth for your help. You can use it on the web page. You know, when you do -online, you can use the same Markdown file for that as you're often providing the help internally to the module. It's great. This will really, the XML format for help in PowerShell is pretty horrendous.
Nobody likes writing it.
No.
Except Richard Sidaway, as we found out in Chris's session before.
He actually likes writing it.
He put his hand up.
Wow. I think it's awful.
With no comment.
But PlatyPS will be able to automate all of the help tasks that you need. I don't use this very much, but it may be more useful for somebody who's in an enterprise than it is for me, because my job is to write a single module, not to write many modules. If you're finding yourself writing many modules and you're saying, okay, right, well, I've got to do Pester, I've got unit tests, I've got integration tests, I've got stress tests, I've got folders for my private and public functions, and then you're trying to build all of this structure around your code to help people, A, do the right thing, and B, understand it between when you've got somebody else to take over from somebody. Pester is a great framework for standardizing PowerShell development. It's kind of like, if you're familiar with Visual Studio, yeah, you can pick a project and it will build all the structure for you, and so you don't have to build it yourself. Pester's the same way of doing that for PowerShell as this sort of thing is for Visual Studio. So, super useful. Those are the commands. I'm not going to go into those for Pester. It integrates the VS Code. Yeah, I'll ask you for a path, and then a name of the module, version number, and it will create all the structure for you. So, at Veya, or tools like that, CICD, GitLab's got one built in. A lot of places have got one built in now. At Veya's one that you can use for free for open source projects. I mainly use it for automating running my Pester tests. So if I push a change to my GitHub repo, Veya will notice that. It will spin up, I think it's a nano VM in Azure. Install PowerShell, install Pester. We'll run all your Pester tests, and you've never had to leave VS Code. You've just pushed to your repo, right? And then you're getting instant feedback from the stuff in the cloud. And one of the nice things, seems silly, but I think it's nice, is the ability to say, all right, I'm now going to have a badge in the README of my repo. So if you ever see this sign, test passing, on the front page of somebody's README repo, it's because they've been using that Veya to test their code. And at least the thing that you can tell is that this code is passing the tests that the developer has written for it. It even shows that they've thought about tests, which many people don't. So it's probably a good sign if I'm not saying it's going to work, but it's definitely a good sign if somebody's at least thought about testing and running it every time you push a change to the repo. Anybody use CI/CD tools? Yeah. So I do have a video for this somewhere, but 30 seconds to prepare. It's just so nice to be able to push a change and get immediate feedback, run it in the cloud. Everybody knows that the tests are passing. It's great. GitLab's one I don't mind as well. And the one for Linux is Travis, isn't it? Travis. There's a lot, yeah. Use whichever one you like. I quite like Invoke Build as well, or you can use Saki if you want, yeah, which is to abbreviate the running of all of these tests and essentially create some structure around your PowerShell project. This bit, the other guy presenting usually does, so I'm not going to go into this very much at all. I'm not saying that you have to use all of these tools, or even that you have to do all of these things, right? If you're not using version control, just do that. If you're not using Pester, just take that on. These are not all essential. Don't go away thinking, right, my project's not be any good if I'm not using all of these tools and using them well. That's not the point at all. You can use any of these tools and it will probably make your life easier and will make your code better. You don't have to use them all. I've got a YouTube channel on PowerShell. current series is on Pester. I have an old one which is how to build the BPF Kiwis for PowerShell scripts. That's a weird one, isn't it? It's like, why would I need to build a GUI if I'm writing PowerShell? Well, it's for people who can't use PowerShell, right? But you still want them to be able to use the functionality of your scripts. So if you want to have a look at that, then feel free. Jim Moyle, just search for my name and you'll find it. All right, next steps. Figure out one of these things that you may not be doing that may interest you and go and have a look at it. Anything that people have seen that they might go and use in their daily life that they hadn't known about or hadn't thought about before? Good, good. Nobody finds anything useful. That's good. All right, that is 45 minutes, just about. Any questions? How did I pull this together in 30 seconds? I've done it before.
Whereabouts?
Sorry? Whereabouts?
Where have you presented before?
So I run the UK Citrix user group. So I presented there many times. I presented at Microsoft Ignite, Citrix Synergy, VMware, VMworld, lots of other places, but yeah.
Present at the London PowerShell user group about this GUI tool.
Yep, done that as well. I did quite a lot of public speaking and community work, so. Actually, on the YouTube channel, I've got a playlist of all the publicly available sessions that I've done if you're even slightly interested, but it's there. All right, thank you very much for attending. And I know you wanted to watch an AD session, but unfortunately that wasn't available. So hopefully this was in some way a little bit of a good filler for you. Thanks very much.